We're talking actors and directors who put on the shows.
We're talking playwrights and designers who you'll want to know.
From the very first rehearsal to the final curtain call.
We might be off Broadway, but we're talking about it all.
'Cause we're two local gals
With global pals, it's everything, everything, everything theater.
with Benita
And Ellen. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Everything Theater Podcast Backstage episode. I'm Ellen Cribbs.
And I'm Benita Zahn. I love when we're backstage. It's cozy. We get to schmooze. But this is a special backstage because we have J.J. Buechner with us, writer, actor, director, set designer, a costumer, hair, wigs, you name it, J.J. does it. He truly embodies everything theater. Hi, JJ.
Hello. So happy to be here for this very special backstage thing. Subject very dear to my heart.
Absolutely. And before we jump into that subject, we're going to let everyone know this episode is sponsored by Masterclass Performing Arts. They're doing Disney's Descendants at Rensselaer Central School District Auditorium from October 21st to the 23rd, featuring over 40 students from across the Capital Region. You can check them out at masterclassperformingarts.com. And also sponsored by Playhouse Stage Company. They're kicking off their 35th anniversary season with Stephen Sondheim's fascinating, controversial, and altogether captivating musical Assassins. Performances run October 13th to the 30th at the historic Cohoes Music Hall. Tickets are available at playhousestage.org. That's playhousestage.org. Check it out.
And yours truly
Yes.
happens to be in it. And just a shout out, Ellen, you've got a show coming up also at UAlbany.
Yes, I'm doing The Wolves at UAlbany, directed by Yvonne Perry, and it is with a group of amazing young actresses. It's a really wild show that runs October 19th through the 23rd at UAlbany.
So get on out, put on your going to theater shoes and enjoy. And JJ, putting on your shoes is sort of our way to transition to talking to you because, Ellen, you had seen an article in the New York Times about our men in dresses on stage funny anymore. And you said, what do you think?
Yeah, and this kind of, if I can share just a quick little story, where I'm coming with this, the article really jumped out to me because, one of all, I'm a huge fan of Some Like It Hot, the movie, and it's being turned into a musical. So it's interesting this is coming up. But it took me back to when I used to do some Shakespeare in schools. And we did the play within a play scene from Midsummer's where Flute plays Thisbe at the end. So it's a man playing a woman. And after doing the scene, the administration of the school said, we weren't a big fan of that because we were scared maybe it was offending any of our students out there who are questioning their gender identity or are trans. And it really blew my mind because I never thought of that scene in that context. And the more I've been kind of thinking about it, I thought back to how that scene would play in Shakespeare's time and how all the female characters were played by men. So the humor of that scene is not that Flute comes out and he's in a dress and everyone would laugh because you'd have Helena and Hermia and Titania, everybody was in a dress and people took them very seriously. The humor was the context behind how Flute didn't want to play it and how he addresses that character and how his acting is. And so it made me kind of think about when, as a society, the joke kind of turned to a man walks on a stage in a dress and that's the joke as opposed to the context behind it. And I think that's going to be some of our conversation today.
And as you well know, Ellen and I crossed paths originally at Capitol Rep. We were doing Shakespeare in Love, and I was cast as a man. And Maggie, Mancinelli Cahill said to me, how do you feel about doing this? And my feeling was, I'm an actor. What do you need me to do? And I can't recall specifically the construct of it, but my character could very well in history have been a woman posing as a man in order to get ahead. And then another scene, I played a bar wench, in 5-inch heels and hot pink boots that came up to my nether regions. So, it really was a bit of everything. But when you raise this, it made me think about that from another standpoint, you know, women having an opportunity to live a life they may not have. And we know in literature, there are women who posed as men, so their writing would be taken seriously, that they could be published. It's fraught with a lot of stuff. JJ, before we get to the answers that folks said, what do you think?
Having been in a man in a dress on stage many times, I find it, when it's taken as you walk on stage as a man in a dress and you wink at the audience, you're telling the audience to laugh at you, as opposed to when I played Edna in Hairspray, you're supposed to laugh with me. And I remember when I did that show, the director said to me, because I had my own wardrobe, obviously I did drag for many years. So I had most of the outfits. So I put my tights on, put the wig on, put the dress on. He goes, you know, it'd be really funny if you wore knee highs and showed your hairy legs. And I said, what does that do for the kid? He goes, well, I saw it done once at this community theater. Everybody just laughed as soon as they saw the hairy legs. And I said to him, if you want me to play this role, you have to understand that I am playing a housewife. I am not a man in a dress. I am a woman. So for me, when I played roles, if they said to me, let's do it as a joke, then I'm not going to do it. Either you're casting me in a female role, you're doing some gender swapping, and I'm going to present as female. I'm not going to have crazy drag makeup on. I'm going to have everyday makeup on. So that's where I come from when it comes to this type of thing.
And it's interesting you mentioned Hairspray, because that's one that I know people love, but that's one that I personally have a little issue with, because in the movie, it's Divine who, I mean, that's who she was. That's why John Water, you know, that's why she was cast that way. But when you see like John Travolta in the, you know, new movie, then it's a little like,
that was unfortunate.
Yeah.
I had high hopes for that movie because I'm from the original Hairspray. That's where I get my love of Hairspray from the original. So when I did it, because I saw Harvey Fierstein play it on Broadway, which he was brilliant, but the director again said, he goes, can you lower your voice? And I said, I will give you a little bit of Harvey Fierstein, but just know this role is coming from Divine. And he goes, oh, I never thought about that. I'm like, well, yeah, maybe you shouldn't direct it then, but he did. So,
but then let me ask, what's the difference of Harvey playing the role or John Travolta, besides their acting chops?
Harvey Fierstein, coming from doing Torch Song Trilogy, I think came more from the mental place that I came from playing Edna than John Travolta. I think John Travolta played it with a wink. And that's where it kind of disconnected. I mean, was it horrible? No. Did he have a Baltimore accent? Yes. People were really irritated by that Baltimore accent, but that's unfortunately a common accent, but he was the only one that had it. So I think that really threw off the entire movie for me. But
and I think before we go further, we have to talk about drag as an art form.
Which it's changing, because now they call them AFAB queens. AFAB, assigned female at birth. So there are straight women doing drag, and then there are straight men doing drag. So it's evolving so much more. Everything is becoming more fluid when it comes to the drag as an art, and it's $1 million industry now with RuPaul's Drag Race. So and a lot of those drag queens from RuPaul's Drag Race are going on national tours, Broadway musicals. Some are playing traditionally female roles, and one of them is playing actually Edna in the national tour of Hairspray right now. So
the art form of drag, what's the iteration of that, JJ? You know, it sprung from what?
I believe it goes all the way back to Shakespeare, because that's what, you know, and you know, there's in vaudeville, there was a play called The Nance with Nathan Lane. And in vaudeville, they always had a drag character, and it was usually a gay guy who they would, but it was to poke fun. And then, you know, they started having balls, but people have been getting in drag in like Victorian era. You know, they used to have drag balls very early in the like 1900s in New York City. So it's been around, and it's just, really didn't come to mainstream until really I would say the 90s when RuPaul had that first single, CoverGirl. And I think it's always been there. It's the drag balls in the 60s and the 70s and 80s and the 90s. It's there. It's always been there.
So are we talking about two different art forms? This is one of my questions of like, is drag different than, say, Mrs. Doubtfire?
Yeah, I would say, I think it's a little different because that's such a different Mrs. Doubtfire. That story is crazy, but it could be viewed as drag. I mean, it is I don't know. That one's hard. I think Tootsie's more of a drag than Mrs. Doubtfire.
But Tootsie, Mrs. Doubtfire, in a sense, it goes back to playing a role that you could not be in real life because of social constructs.
Correct.
So it's a statement on society that a man has to dress up as a woman in order to provide this care. And shouldn't we be looking at us as a society that creates this situation?
Oh, absolutely.
That's different. So we can put that, because that's really the story as compared, or is it any different than Some Like It Hot, where the guys dress up as women to get by?
Right. Well, I think because Mrs. Doubtfire, that kind of hit home to me because my mother was a single mother, and my father, and she would always say, "You got to go see your father. You got to go see your father." He didn't want to see me a lot, so to see someone have to physically change who they are just to have to spend time with their kids is such a. We almost want to be like, "Oh, Sally Field, you were the villain in that movie, not Robin Williams. You were the villain." He wanted to see his kids. I want to see my kids. My kids are everything. So, but it even goes back to like even on TV, was it Bosom Buddies with Tom Hanks, where they had to dress up like women to live in a woman's, and that was looking back, that was problematic, obviously, but
And it's interesting with Some Like It Hot because I can see why people take issue with it. And it made me kind of look at why I love the film so much and be like, should I reevaluate this? But I think, it'll be interesting to see how the musical takes it because it's a very fine line. And I think looking back at things I really like about the film is that you have Tony Curtis, I think, learns a lot about himself by not being this playboy and actually talking to Marilyn Monroe and getting to know her and falling in love. And Jack Lemmon discovering this very feminine part of himself that he embraces fully and then just loves. He's not making fun of it. He's finding a new element to himself. And the very last line of the movie is when he tells the millionaire, "I'm a man." And he says, "That's okay too." It's not an issue of, gender. It's, celebrating kind of finding that part of themselves. And I think that's something the musical really needs to be careful and fine-tuned, that it's not just, isn't this funny that these guys are dressing up and
And Ellen, your comment about how that wraps up, at that time, think about how progressive that was.
Yeah.
And I'm sure a lot of people just think, oh, but for others, it was if only. I mean, this is well before, gay marriage, same-sex marriage, was even thought about as being possible because, same-sex couples were still living on the down low at that time. So really, when you look at that movie with today's eyes, it was a cutting edge in terms of the social commentary. Your point is so well taken. Let's hit some of the comments, Ellen. You want to start with Casey?
Absolutely. I'll read Casey. So Casey says, the situation that leads to the man wearing the dress and the situations that result from it matter. For me, Mrs. Doubtfire works because the situation is sentimental and heartbreaking and heartwarming. The comedy results from not wanting to be found out and navigating, learning new skills and life lessons that make him a better person. In counterpoint, Some Like It Hot is more about laughing at straight men, having gay panic moments, and taking advantage of women who do not know their true identity. There's also quite a variety within the genre, if that can be what it's called. We have characters who are straight cis men wearing the dress for some reason, like examples above. Some characters only present as a woman, but the inside joke is the audience knows they are cis men, Trunchbull from Matilda. We also have drag characters like Lola and Kinky Boots who turn man in a dress comedy on its head and reclaim it for power.
JJ, your thoughts?
Yeah, it really goes back again to that winking at the audience when it's like it's just, but I don't think Mrs. Trunchbull that kind of does that. I didn't know how they were going to handle Mrs. Trunchbull when they did it, but when they said, "Oh, it's going to be a cis male playing it," or someone assigned male at birth playing that role, I kind of liked it. I think it was because what woman wants to get cast as the ugliest woman really in the world, like the Trunchbull type, So, but again, they don't really laugh at it because the actors playing it are presenting themselves as a female. They're not making it a joke. So
when I saw it, I didn't
yeah.
think like, oh, that's a man playing Trunchbull.
Yeah.
I just was like, wow, look at that
Yeah.
character, Yeah.
Does it work if Trunchbull isn't a man?
I think it could work either way. I think, vocally, vocally probably have to be changed, but I think it could work.
We'll see what Emma Thompson does with it in the movie,
right?
Because it is
she's doing in the movie.
Yeah.
David says it's an outdated gag.
Again, if you're winking, yes. But even some like It Hot. I mean, that movie was in the book The Celluloid Closet, where Vito, I forget his last name, he was out male in the 70s, went back in cinema and looked and found all these instances of positive gay representation that were just in movies. And Some Like It Hot, he references the end of it on how, and then he noticed as things change in Hollywood, men in dresses and LGBTQ people became the villains. And then they made fun of people in dresses. And a lot of times it'd be male killers dressing up as women to kill and become serial killers. So, but yeah, it's outdated in certain contexts, I think. I even think Tootsie's a little outdated. I think they probably could have done a little more tweaking with that story, but that character, again, learns a lesson. So
it's like Hollywood back in the day was really being embracing in a way that was non-threatening and making
correct.
They were slipping it by.
Absolutely.
Jessica says, I think we have the opportunity to explore the context more and adapt the staging and tone to modern audiences. The actual idea of a man in a dress doesn't have to be what is funny about the situation of someone assuming an identity that's not their own. Directors and actors can play up the situation that led the character there in the first place as funny, rather than the actual man in a dress trope. It could be an interesting challenge and yield some deeper meaning from old works, while still providing room for comedy.
You know what? This comment made me think back to, again, going back to Shakespeare. You've got the classic woman dressing as man, as you pointed out, Benita, to get by. And so then it's a question of, is that a joke? Like, I feel like you watch those plays and you don't laugh when Rosalind comes out dressed as Ganymede. You're just like, oh wow, she's trying to survive. So what, so yeah, it's just interesting to see how that's kind of different as a woman dressing as a man versus a man dressing as a woman.
A lot of social commentary.
Yeah.
If we take the time to look beyond the veneer of the skirt.
Yeah, let me August says, such a great topic to discuss. I highly recommend seeking out one or two willing trans folks to weigh in. Trans women in particular would be an incredible source as they face the most harm when it comes to this particular issue. I'd also recommend the Netflix documentary Disclosure if you haven't already watched it. It's invaluable. Countless trans folks discuss this topic at length.
And I didn't have the opportunity. I just read the synopsis, and that's definitely got to be something it's on my list to get back to take a look at.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, and it's, and this kind of goes back to the comment I made about the administration worried that our scene was offending any kids out there who were trans, that, or not in that transitional stage of, what is my identity, Yeah.
In many ways, this speaks to the heart of what is theater. Theater, good theater is never just the veneer. That's not good theater. Good theater should make us think and explore and delve and question. It should.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of out trans actors and actresses that are like, what is it, Once on This Island, the revival.
Yeah.
The lead character from Pose was in the Hollywood Bowl's Little Shop of Horrors as Audrey. And now, because everything is becoming so mainstream, like with the series Pose, trans men and women are being seen in such a positive light and are getting roles. Like there's some from Pose who are in American Horror Story, and it's a trans female, but playing a female. And it's not about being trans, it's about they are now female and they are being accepted as a female actress. So, but also too, and then they get the chance to play trans characters, and they were on Pose, they were amazing. So, and now they're making that leap onto the stage, which is amazing. It's where we're heading. I mean, look at the 1776 revival. That is going to be all female cast. And a friend of mine saw the when they first did it and said it was one of the most amazing nights of theater ever.
Wow.
Patrick says, I'm not sure it was ever funny. Imagine if you were transgender in the 50s watching Milton Berle.
Alex Perone and I actually talked about Milton Berle last night backstage at the show, because I told him I was doing this. And he said it's such a different, that genre, like the Milton Berle thing was. And like, even think, I forgot what show he brought up, like Monty Python had a lot of quote unquote drag roles. And there's certain characters that wouldn't work if it wasn't, unfortunately, the trope of a man in a dress. Because there is that kind of comedy. There is that man in dress comedy that sometimes is funny, sometimes, and a lot of times offensive, but sometimes, like Danny LaRue, the drag queen in London, who used to walk on stage and say in a man's voice, "Oi, matey," and then but he did Hello Dolly at the West End so I think the Milton Berle thing, that was such a specific time and place. And what was it? Flip Wilson did the same thing, invented these characters. So they were characters. They weren't necessarily, to make fun. I think they were. But that I think that Milton Berle comedy is gone, and I can't imagine what it was like for a trans person to look at that and go, "Ooh," Or lucky we're moving forward in a different place now that there's representation.
Ellen?
Nathaniel says, the man learns a lesson after he is forced to pass for a woman in public plot, still has the potential for a good depiction, but there's a bunch of caveats. Obviously, there's a spectrum of quality, with ladybugs at one end, and I don't know what at the other. I think part of the issue is a lot of the alleged comedy of the situation comes from an ignorant man finding out basic truths that they should by now be acquainted with. I hope the New York Times article, makes a distinction between drag as means to an end and drag trans femme presentation as celebratory existence. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah. Yes. And we're going to split up the next one, Ellen, because Nicole wrote very thoughtful. There's a lot there. And Nicole says, I'll preface it by saying I'm a bit of a gender non-conforming gal myself, so that's where I'm coming from. I think the unexpected is often a source of humor. And finding the unexpected funny is a natural reaction. And this is the core of the humor that comes from a man in a dress. Currently, it is unexpected to see a man in a dress. To see a man in a dress, as has been the case in Western culture for as long as anyone alive can remember. Seeing men in dresses is becoming less rare, but it's still pretty uncommon, unless, of course, you're a bagpiper. But certainly this sense of going against expectations is what makes a lot of drag so funny. On the flip side of that, there are a lot of women who find drag offensive and consider it akin to a minstrel show. Some call it woman face and believe that the source of humor isn't so much the unexpected as it is mocking the oppression of women through appropriating how a woman is expected to look. And I'll pause there. Which is the flip side of what we talked about in Shakespeare, and that women often had to assume male roles to be accepted. And even in current day, where women where men are dressed as women to be accepted in a role, a societal role they want to be in. So clearly, nothing's black and white in this.
Mm-hmm.
You want to pick it up, Ellen?
Absolutely. It says, certainly even today, there are circumstances and places where women are required to wear dresses as a form of oppression and submission. Fortunately, this is rare in Western culture, though there are people alive who can remember a time when compulsory dress wearing for women was the norm. So I think there was a time in recent past where we could definitely say, yes, drag is funny, but always offensive because during that time it was unexpected to see a man in a dress and compulsory for a woman to wear one. In the future, it could be so common for men to wear dresses that it's not funny to see in and of itself, and dresses will no longer be used to oppress women. Right now, I think we're still at a point where it's unexpected to see a man in a dress, so it's still funny, but sometimes it can be offensive depending on if the dress is in the style of one that would be used to oppress women. That being said, I think that each of these three titles mentioned, Mrs. Doubtfire, Tootsie, Some Like It Hot, the humor comes from a combination of a man wearing a dress to be deceptive in some cases, using that deception to manipulate women to act against their desires, from a man playing the role of a woman better than an actual woman. I don't think either of these situations are funny, no matter what dress a man is wearing.
Very thought-provoking.
Yeah.
Look,
it is.
Yeah, we're not going to solve, clearly, but
Yeah.
I think just the fact we're having this discussion,
Mm-hmm.
I think is what's important,
And I think, moving forward, I think the more theaters talk about this is so important. We've certainly spent a lot of time talking about color conscious casting, which is incredibly important, but also gender conscious casting, of making opportunities, as JJ said, for trans people and, making roles available to people who identify a certain way and can play that role to the truth that that role should be played.
Let me ask you about Peter Pan.
Always was cast female. There was always a female Peter Pan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing a story that the excuse was that Peter Pan flies so much that they wanted someone who had a smaller frame. I don't know if that's true, but someone said the story. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. But yeah, but it is interesting.
Diminutive man who is a fabulous performer. They exist.
Thousands of them.
Yeah.
But it is interesting that the little boy who didn't want to grow up has always been played by someone assigned female at birth.
And what does that say? That's probably a subject for somebody's master thesis.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Oh, definitely is.
Sure.
You heard it here first, folks.
Always wonderful to see you, JJ.
Yes.
You just had a wonderful run in Tiny Houses.
Yes.
Curtain Call. You're doing some writing and directing coming up, and catching your breath.
Yes, catch my breath. Resetting after a long run.
And we'll keep tabs on you. You're always welcome to, be a sponsor when you got something going. And Ellen,
yes, definitely.
You got this week's sponsors to let everybody know about again.
Absolutely. So October 21st to the 23rd, go check out the amazing students from across the Capital Region in Disney's Descendants, presented at the Rensselaer Central School District Auditorium from Masterclass Performing Arts. It's masterclassperformingarts.com. You can find all the information there. And coming up, our own Benita's on in Assassins, which is just a wild, wonderful musical from Stephen Sondheim. It's a Playhouse Stage Company running from October 13th through the 30th at Cohoes Music Hall. Tickets are available at playhousestage.org.
So come on down, great places in Cohoes to get a bite. Beforehand, parking is easy in Cohoes, which is always something that you've got to consider. So we look forward to seeing you. I think it's a very timely play to be performing. So JJ, all best. Everybody, Thank you so much for joining us. We'll have another great program coming up for you. We've got a couple of folks in the pipeline, so you're going to want to stay with us. I'm Benita Zahn.
I'm Ellen Cribbs. We'll catch you guys next time. Thank you so much for listening to the Everything Theater podcast. Special thanks goes out to Alice Grinling for our photography and Justin Friello for composing our amazing theme song. Please remember to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you want to share your thoughts or what's going on in your theater community, you can reach out to us on social media or through our email at everythingtheaterpodcast@gmail.com. Till next time, it's everything, everything, everything.